Over here off Rattlesnake Reef, third chain islands, down the runway, all this area here, a lot of great grass that's on this shoreline. We've had a little bit more water consistently in our system now, so it's been a good thing. Been able to kind of push back in some of these back lakes a little bit, so we kind of waded back off into these areas here a little bit, working all that, throwing top waters back in there. And we had a couple of days we had enough water in there we could actually deal with our plastics back in there and it not be an issue with all the grass and all that kind of stuff. There is a lot of floating grass because as that day heats up, that grass starts releasing and starts floating in a lot of places. So we had a little bit more wind this past week and weekend, so which was a good thing. Got to have it. But, just kind of worked back in here, found a few fish that were hanging back in there, but we kind of kept ourselves really focused more on this outside edge, all the way down to Cedar Reef, the flat area, all the way down to Cedar Bayou, and this whole little flat that's back in here, it pushes all the way down to the mouth of Cedar Bayou. So, like I say, we're just taking our time working that, still working over the hard packed sand, grass, shell, back up there in the third chain. There were some fish that were hanging around those off the little edges, the drops there. Belding's Reef, the dugout there. You got a nice little edge that's on that, and found a few fish that were hanging around that. A lot of bait in the system. So we're a week into September. Not a lot of changes just yet. Once we get our first little cool front that comes in here, which I would anticipate probably in the next 3 to 6 weeks, maybe longer. I don't know. We'll see. But once we get that kind of rolls in here, then you'll start to see some gradual changes until it gets a real significant cool front. So we'll see about that. But as of right now, you can still hang into your tactics and what we're doing. Again, hard packed sand, grass, shell bars, shell reefs. Fish are still holding over that type of structure. That's where they want to go. Then kind of hopscotched over here to the Madre shoreline, kind of worked all this grass, big grass flat that's over there. If you fish that, then you know what I'm talking about. A lot of redfish are kind of cruising because we're into that time of the year where they're grouping up. And typically, once they start grouping up like that, if you find some, usually that first redfish that you catch out of it, whether it be a undersize, if it's an 18, 19-inch fish or a 21 to 24-inch fish, that's typically going to be the size of fish that are going to be in that group. The majority of them anyway are going to be in that size. So if you got tournament redfish coming up, or you got some trout tournaments that are coming up where you got to have at least 1 or 2 redfish, that's kind of the stuff that you want to eyeball. Particularly you want to find the ones that are in that upper slot area, that 26 to 28 if at all possible. But that's what's happened this past week. We found fish, found redfish, found some small groups. They weren't big, anywhere from 5 to 15 in the little pods here and there, but they were all decent fish. They're in that 22, 23, 24-inch range redfish, and then some trout that were sprinkled in there with them that were better fish. They're in that upper slot, 18s, 19s, that are around those fish. And then, of course, you found some individuals that were working off the edges and off the potholes there that were a little bit smaller fish. We found, a lot of smaller trout that are in our system as well. You're catching those 13s to 15s that are in there. You just kind of have to wade through those, just kind of deal with them as they're kind of hanging out in there. Main baits that we used this past week that were really productive for us were the Pav lures. There's a new flavor that he's got out. It's black and gold. It's got a lot of gold flake in it with the black background, and that particular bait was very productive for us. Another bait that did really well for us was the knock and tail lures. Redfish seem to be really keen in on that. It's got the rattle chamber that's in the tail of it, so it's got a little bit bigger paddle. So it really played well for us. Those 2 baits in specific were the most productive for us. Then our down south, that's the go-to for me a lot. Throw a lot of the down south. And then the mirror lure, Little John, in the Truth did pretty well for us as well. And we sprinkled in some topwater baits that had some pretty productive days as well with that. So had a large variety of different baits that we were using. throughout the week. Main was, we're in that big moon right now, so I like to downsize our profile. So a lot of burner shad, a lot of the knock and tail, the mirror lure little johns, kind of hung with that. Another one in the Pav lure is called a little softy. So it mimics what a soft dine looks like. So, and it's got a lot of great action on it. So that was that smaller profile as well that did pretty well for us too. So, but as we got to that 1 o'clock time frame, that a lot of that floating grass was in there, so it kind of became an issue. So we had to stick more with our plastics and stuff so we can get underneath that. A lot of the suspended baits like the little softy or the double D or even the topwater baits were just catching so much grass, we just kind of abandoned those just so we didn't have to contend with it. But again, a very, very productive week. Majors and minors were a main thing for us. Like I say, we're right in the middle of the big moon coming up, a little past the big moon, so you still have that time frame in which you have to contend with that. So I would stick with the smaller profile bait, and then we'll get into our transition days as the week progresses. So just keep that in mind as you prepare for this upcoming week if you get the opportunity to be out on the water. Back here in Kelly Lake, on the backside of Mud, we spent a little bit of time up in here, especially on one of the little bit higher tide days. We got back in here, water levels, basically waist deep. And when you can get back here on the backside of that and you've got that kind of depth of water, you usually can light up pretty good for us. The particular day that we fished back in here, it was pretty good. Caught a few fish that were hanging off this bar that's out here, and then we kind of worked this back shoreline all the way to the cut. Fished some areas back in here on this back shoreline over here. Just spent some time with that. Then we kind of made our way back out to the front half, came through the cut here, and then got on this end down here. And if you haven't fished this area down here, you've got a lot of guts that are in there, a lot of great, terrific grass that's in there, a lot of bait. Found a lot of fish that were pushed just off those edges of those grass bars and then off in the deeper guts. That was more of a early morning process, working that there, and then once our bite kind of died, that's when we jumped back into Kelly's Lake back and on the backside, and just worked a lot of the flats and worked a lot of the grassy areas and the potholes, the shoreline. That's the kind of structure that we kind of positioned ourselves over. Again, just working down this shoreline, just real methodical, and just letting the fish kind of dictate to us what they really wanted to do. So our bites on this particular day that we fished this was really not a bad morning at all. The previous days they were a little bit more difficult to get fish to want to eat, but on this particular day, well, I think it was maybe a Thursday, maybe a Friday, that we worked all this area here up and down the shoreline. Not a lot of boat traffic on that day. Of course, this past Saturday you had the Haney Boat Owners Tournament, which there was a lot more boats on the water on that particular day. So had to be a little bit more selective in the areas you go and make sure that you had some other areas lined up just because the amount of boats that were scattered out everywhere. So, but the day that we fished here, very productive for us. Again, a lot of the same baits that we were using, really focused our time frame. The minor was early morning, so it really didn't give the opportunity to fish that. So we fished more focused on the major, which was later in the morning, started, it'd get around, depending on the day that you fished, it'd be anywhere from 9 o'clock all the way to 12 o'clock. So, and then this, it progresses. It just moves back an hour each day approximately. So we kind of became our target time frame, and we really wanted to be in the areas where we really want to focus on trying to locate those fish to see if we get them to continue to eat. So again, down south in the burner shad was the mud. Well, they don't have the mud minnow right now, but the firecracker, twisted tea, big papa, white ice, and bone diamond. Purple rain was another one that was in there. In the knock and tail was the greenback and heavy metal primarily, which did pretty well for us. Then in the mirror lure Little John, it was the watermelon red, the truth was those are the two main ones that I threw. Like I say, and then in the Pav lures, we had a multiple flavors that we were throwing in there, but the one I mentioned earlier, the black and gold flake in there, did pretty well for us as well. A lot of good opportunities with that. And then, of course, the little softy in there with this smaller, much smaller profile. And they have the big brother to it's the big softy, and that's going to be a bait as we get further into our fall and we start getting into our winter time. It's a bait that you're really going to want to have in your box because they're real similar to what the fat boys do. So it's another good alternative for you to have in your box if you're not a big Corky fan. So it's got great action on it. It's a suspended bait. It's got a little good, great color selection that are in that. And of course, again, we threw some top water down this shoreline as well and had some good opportunities with that. So it's always good when you throw top water baits early, and then you get those blow ups, you get a few catches, and you can kind of filter in some plastics in there behind it if they're not being quite aggressive enough to come up and eat it. So you can get that bait down in there. That's where the little softy and your plastics come in to help with that. So that was our main tactics as we fished over in the Mud Island area, out in the front and the back lake as well. So just, again, trying to target that major time frame in the day. Here, just outside of the Turtle Pen, Shell Point area, this little flat that's right here, it's really hard-packed sand that's in that. A little scattered shell here and there in it. Little bit of grass is sprinkled over that as well. We caught some decent trout over this particular area. And that was just kind of seeing, because I hadn't fished that little location there in quite a while. So we just kind of wanted to see if there was fish that were holding in it, which there were a few. Wasn't great numbers by any means. Had a lot of little ones that were in there. And there was a few, maybe a handful of trout that were in that 16 to 18 range. Decent. One thing we did notice with the few trout that we did keep this past week, that they're still producing eggs. So I'm not sure if this is another batch that's laying again for their second lay, or if they're just started to develop them back in the middle of the summertime and they're starting to get ready to lay. So that's why you really need to start or continue to target your grass flat areas, scattered grass, satellite grass areas, those type of things, and a little bit deeper water as the mornings progress, because our water temps, they're starting out in the upper 80s. We're 88, 87, 89, depending on where you're fishing. And then they're getting up into the low 90s. We're seeing 91, 92 in some areas. So that's when we really start to target that little bit deeper water, starting to fish out there over that 3 foot, maybe 4 foot of water, and locating fish over that type of structures. Again, the satellite grass, little patches that are out there in that deeper water. And the winds were great this past week too, so it was our water was pretty clean for the most part. So you could see those areas pretty well. So 2 of the baits that we really like to target, 3 of the baits that we really like to use to target that kind of stuff, little softy, the double D, and of course our plastics. So those baits right there did pretty well over that type of structure and that kind of location. Then we just kind of worked around the inside in here, got a little bit more, little squishiness mud that's in here, but you got some clump shell that's back in there. We're just checking to see if maybe some redfish might have been hanging there. I don't remember any great numbers. And, of course, one of my favorite areas to fish is back here in the Turtle Pen area. And get on this back shoreline and work all the way down to Copano Creek, in which there was a few redfish that were sprinkled up and down that shoreline there. And, again, same baits what I mentioned in the last video is, our down south in the burner shad, and their assorted colors, even through the originals in there as well, in the same color scheme. Did pretty well with those. Our Pav lures as well. And then, of course, your knock and tail and the Little Johns, all those different baits that we used. Then, of course, if you continue to wade down this back shoreline, you got the creek, Copano Creek that's there, and you got a deeper drop on that. So we try to make sure that we kind of targeted that particular area later in the morning as we got closer to our major time frame. This past week, it's going to be, again, this upcoming week, that major is going to be later in the day, and your minor will become more important to you as we transition away from this new moon, and then we start getting into our wild card days or transition days. So these are the type of areas that we were targeting. That's what we're looking for. And we were finding fish. Again, just not super great numbers. Really kind of starting to figure out and see if we can start finding better trout specifically. Redfish, like I say, they're grouping up and getting ready to make their run to the Gulf out in October. and you'll see more and more opportunities to catch your redfish in that, and you'll find them in groups. And once you do, like which I mentioned earlier, is once you find that group of redfish, if whatever size that first or second fish that you catch, is probably going to be the norm for that whole group. It's going to be about that size and time frame. So that's the kind of stuff that you want to look for as we continue to move forward into September. And just kind of keep an eye on the weather, because this is when things kind of start getting a little screwy for us. They'll start to get changed a little bit, and you just don't want to get yourself in a bad situation as you get caught out there on the water.